So, real quick, before I begin talking about Civil War, the movie that I just watched, I want to take a second to thank anyone that is watching after seeing my Final Fantasy VII Rebirth ending video. Thank you for the views on that. Thank you if you've subscribed or left a comment on that. I appreciate it. And it has encouraged me to make another video talking about this movie that I just finished watching a couple hours ago, which is Alex Garland's Civil War, released in 2024. So I finished watching this about 5 hours ago, and I've been sitting on it. I was hanging out with a friend, and I was sort of processing it, and I talked with him a little bit about it. And before I watched the film, I had seen some reviews of it. I first became aware of it when it premiered um, at South by Southwest, and I heard about the critical acclaim that it got, and so I was really excited about it. And then as time passed and we got closer to the release and actual critic reviews started coming out, I heard people that were super positive about it. I heard people that were in the middle about it. And I heard people that were pretty down on it. So I went into it not sure exactly what to expect. I tried to go in with an open mind and just ready to absorb what the movie had and see where I came out on it. And I'll try to deliver a quick version of this, and then I'll eventually start rambling, so feel free to check out after the quick review. But I think, in short, basically, um, I did not like this film very much. Um, I actively kind of disliked the film, actually. So to be clear, I didn't dislike watching it. I think, technically speaking, it's a competently made film. You know, for the 2 hours or however long it was, uh, I enjoyed watching it. I didn't have any problems with it just as a 2 hour experience. But as far as it being a movie and a piece of art that I think is supposed to say something or make me feel something or have me walking away having learned something, I think it kind of failed miserably in all of those ways. Um, so, the characters are likable and complex, I think, so they're enjoyable to watch their little road trip journey. And it's a very simple, actual narrative here. It's just a road trip across the country, across a very small part of the country, and in the backdrop of this civil war taking place. Um, the problem is that it seems as though Alex Garland intentionally went out of his way to be very apolitical. So much so that he actually made a lot of decisions that don't make any sense. In order to create a scenario where nobody could possibly walk out of this movie feeling either personally offended or personally validated by the movie. It's, of course, if they're an American, right? If this is the American audiences. And chief among them, I think, just to simply demonstrate this for anybody that knows anything about American politics, or if you just live in America, in the movie, California and Texas have formed an alliance, seceded from the rest of America, and are now known as the Western Alliance. And they, seemingly, by themselves, have almost won the war against the rest of America. Florida is mentioned briefly as like a third faction in this, but they're basically irrelevant. And anyone that knows anything about America knows that this shit does not make any sense at all. But I think that this was an intentional choice by Alex Garland, among many other things that happened in the movie, to be as apolitical as possible, so much so that it's intentionally confusing, so that it cannot possibly be interpreted, even accidentally, as saying something that it's not saying. Because his goal is to say nothing politically. And I think that's my problem with the movie. I think that's the critical failing of the movie. I think that as a political commentary or satire or commentary or critique, or even just a simple insight for people who are not American, or maybe just not political, into the current landscape of American politics, the movie fails. I think that as a cautionary tale about war and specifically why you don't want a civil war, another one, to happen in this country, I think it fails. And I think it also fails as a criticism of journalism and the failings of, like, especially, again, modern journalism under a capitalist system. Uh, I think all of these things it could have said something about, and it chose not to, and or it simply failed to do. And all of that could be fine if it were still a satisfying piece of fiction in its own right. And I think it fails there too because of the aforementioned lack of logic. There are many things in this movie that demand an explanation, and Alex Garland simply refuses to offer one. It is never explained what started the war, how the current president came into power or ended up in his third term, how long the war has been going on, even what year this is set in. Several times, the cast is involved in an active conflict, and it is not clear what side of the conflict they're even on or which side they're with, although it can usually be assumed to be like the Western Alliance, the Western forces. There are just many, many things that demand an explanation, and the basic premise makes so little sense logistically or politically that it's hard to take the work seriously as just a standalone piece of fiction. Um, so it's real difficult to recommend the movie in any of these ways. And I think the decision, which seems to be intentional, to not say anything politically, frankly, I just think is a cowardly move, to be honest. And it borders on tone deaf because when looking at the current state of America, that is very divided, and a lot of people think that a civil war is a possibility, to release a movie called Civil War, explicitly set in modern day America, when nothing about the plot actually demands that it needs to be set in such a setting, and then to say nothing at all about the current political landscape, to take no sides, have no statement, no insight, nothing, offer nothing, is just really cowardly and kind of tone deaf, to be honest. Even if the movie said something I disagreed with, I think I could have respected it more as a film if it at least had something to say, even if I disagreed with it, so long as it just wasn't, sheer propaganda, I guess. And again, that could be fine. I think he could have made this film, and it didn't have to be a political commentary. It could have been a cautionary war story. But I think it failed there too because the level of violence that we're shown here is nothing. It's a joke. It's grade school, right? I just finished watching this week season 2 of Invincible. Is anything that happened in this movie supposed to affect me? Is seeing a couple people get shot and usually not having any blood or anything happen when they die? It's actually almost comical. People get shot in this movie and then they just gone, dead instantly. Even if they get shot in like the chest or the stomach, they're just dead, gone immediately, right? Instantaneous. Which is a hilarious way to do gun violence in what is potentially supposed to be an anti-war, anti-violent movie. There is one scene in which someone is shot and does not die immediately, and there is a little bit of like bleeding shown, but thinking back, I can't even remember if that person died. Like, I don't know what that person's fate was. They may have survived, they may not have. I really don't know. They're the only person who got shot and didn't just disappear from the plot immediately. So in terms of the sheer level of violence and blood and gore and all that was shown, it's just not shocking. It's not anything that your average American or average anybody really has not seen and would be desensitized to. If this movie came out 20 years ago, maybe that would be different. But as a movie released in 2024, in our current landscape of ultraviolence, a new level of ultraviolence that's never even been seen before as we continue to escalate, this movie is basically like a Saturday morning cartoon in comparison, right? And not just the violence, but also uh, the situations that are shown. I just don't think that they really demonstrate the potential horrors of war, especially in light of the fact that there are actively two wars happening overseas right now, both of which we know war crimes are being committed in by the offending side, right? So, as examples, the aid workers that were killed in Palestine by Israel air bombings, and before that, back near the start of the Ukrainian conflict, which I have not been following closely, I remember there was a video of Russian soldiers like castrating a Ukrainian soldier. Uh, that kind of shit that is horrible and graphic, and uh, and demonstrates all of the real problems with war, right? The horrors of war, just as two examples, right? Setting aside all of the friendly fire and civilian casualties, the starvation, the famine, the conditions, all that shit, right? Setting all that aside. Uh, just as two examples, this movie does nothing that even approaches either of those. It shows, it starts by showing one situation, which, to be honest, I'm pretty sure you could find happening right now in Chicago. Like, if you go to like an inner city of gang violence, you could probably find something similar happening. Like, you don't need a civil war to take place for that first scenario to happen. Um, and then it shows, I think, like a random firefight with no context. Again, we don't really know why or how or anything like that. It's just a firefight. Nothing particularly graphic. It's nothing you've not ever seen before. Um, I don't think it says anything in particular. And then there is one pretty tense scene that takes place that does vaguely allude to maybe or some racist or nationalist or xenophobic tendencies that maybe some people have. But that moment and that person who was basically solely responsible for what was happening in that moment is not expanded upon, and I don't think does a good job of demonstrating the fact that this kind of shit happens in a large scale during war. And that was the only moment that even approached saying something. And then it showed another battle, toward the end. I don't think the things, specifically the scenarios demonstrated, are really sufficient to demonstrate and to caution people and to horrify people against the idea of war. And in fact, there was one scenario that made, again, no sense, where it was just this random nowhere town that like I drove through on my way back home, basically, that basically was pretending as if the war didn't exist because they had a couple guys on a rooftop that I guess are enough to stop somehow the might of both the American government and Texas and California, who are themselves able to oppose the American government. But a couple of guys on rooftops are enough to keep this one random town in the middle of fucking nowhere completely immune to the war. Sure, okay, whatever. Let's pretend that makes any sense at all. And as a criticism of journalism, which I think is maybe also what was being gone for here, I think it fails there too because for similar reasons, just the scale of what we're shown is not sufficient. I mean, I've been listening to some true crime podcasts recently, and somehow I've come across two where the media, local newspapers, and their insatiable need for clicks and newspaper sales and dollars and pennies have explicitly gotten at least two children killed in kidnapping plots because they couldn't hold themselves back from publishing details of a police sting intended to catch the kidnapper before harm could come to the child. So compared to shit like that, just as one fucking random example, as an anecdote from my own life, among tons of other examples you could come up with, what we're shown here about the kind of moral ambiguity of journalism, I just don't think anything really is said about it. And again, it doesn't help that we don't really understand why any of this is happening. We don't know anyone's motivations for anything that's happening. It just doesn't make any sense. Um, and I think that this is all a shame and exasperated by the fact that this movie had a lot of potential. It could have come in and actually really said something. As a non-American, Alex Garland could have looked at this situation and offered some kind of real insight into the state of our political system. As any of these four types of media. And he either chose not to intentionally or simply failed to deliver in all four categories, which is a shame. Um, so for me, ultimately, I think it was just kind of a nothing movie. As a piece of art, I don't feel anything, and I haven't been challenged in any way. I don't have to think about anything. Um, I'm not left with anything. I haven't learned anything. It was just 2 hours of my life. I looked at the screen, things happened, and then I walked out of the theater. And I don't think I'll really think about this movie again tomorrow. And I think as a society, as like a culture, I honestly kind of think this movie will fall into like obscurity. I don't think anyone will remember this movie. Certainly not in the way that people remember Ex Machina, for example, which was a movie that did actually have all like a compelling fictional world that made sense, and by the end left you asking questions about the nature of sentience, AI, humanity, morality, your own morality, where you stand in all this. I just don't think this movie really accomplishes anything, which is a shame. Because it could have. Again, even if it said something I disagreed with, I feel like I would have respected it more than a movie that chose not to say anything out of cowardice, basically. Um, but that's my take on it. I think that's most of my thoughts, really. There were a couple good moments. There was one line that I liked, which was when the main character Lee said, when she went overseas to take these photos of war and she sent them home, she thought she was telling America and people what not to do, why not to do this at home. And clearly that failed. That moment, I think, was good and will stay with me. And the one scene that was kind of tense about halfway through the movie, that was a good scene. I won't take that away from the movie. It was a good scene, although it certainly could have been a lot better. Um, but I am ultimately just kind of disappointed with the movie. And to be honest, if I'm going to watch a movie called Civil War, I'm going to go watch Captain America.